humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Nyanis. I'm going to continue with the structural changes that happens in our brain when we start practicing introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, and also service-mindedness that we have. The last 11 parts, we've been covering all the parts of the brain. And I'm going to today summarize all the 12 parts of the brain and what happens when we practice our meditation diligently, the kind of fusion that takes place in our brain that ultimately leads to the outcome that we want to achieve, which is a kind of a healthy body, mind, and our brain, our intellect, and also a joyful and happy life. So I want to take you through the kind of overall structural changes that happens in the brain, and then the kind of chemistry that takes place that, as I said in one of my previous satsangs, that how it generates the happy hormones that makes us, joyful, happy, the sandosa nila. So I'm going to today give you a quick summary of everything that we have done. If at all you want to remember this one chart that actually gives you an overall what happens in your brain if you meditate. So this is what the brain looks like and the different parts of the brain that we have. And we see that, in the brain, we have the neurotransmitters I spoke about, the cerebrum, the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, the pituitary gland, all the 12 parts of the brain that we have. And each one of them have their own functions. And you'll see that I won't go into detail, but I'm going to, you'll be able to see what that different functions are. It covers things such as, the neurotransmitter, chemical relays, cerebrum. You have two parts of the cerebrum. Each one has its own function. The prefrontal cortex gives you higher cognitive abilities. The frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex gives you rational thinking, concentration, happiness, creativity. The pituitary gland is the master gland that controls all the other glands, and it helps you with your metabolism and so on. Then the other ones, the parietal lobe is movements. Occipital lobe is about perception. Then, left and right lobe, I won't go into detail, but actually speaks about language, speech, non-verbal memory. All these are very important for the brain to cognize. The part 9 is the cerebellum, which actually coordinates our movements. And you see that as we age, this part starts disintegrating, and we see that sometimes it limits our movements. Our movements is not steady. Then the limbic system, a very complex system there, which I covered that. The brain stem, that connects between the brain and the spinal cord, which is really important because particularly as we age, the muscle starts declining. We see that the connectivity becomes more hindered, and finally the spinal cord itself. So we see that when we practice meditation, when we do yoga or asanas or exercise, we strengthen these parts of the brain. Due to aging, these parts of the brains will start slowly disintegrating. And if we don't do anything, we don't meditate, we don't exercise, we don't eat healthily, we don't drink the right fluids, we see that our decline becomes much more rapid. Again, as how the muscles, when we exercise, the muscles are strengthened. There are parts of the brain, there are parts of the spinal cord. There are a lot of muscles that actually are very important to keep things intact. And we see that when we do exercise, when we meditate, it strengthens. The same thing with all our neurotransmitters, the nerve systems. When we meditate, It strengthens the brain, the various parts of the brains, and this is going to be very important for the mind. So there are many, benefits of these practices, including yoga and, certain asanas that we do, walking, all those things are very important. And this is a little bit more on the kind of uh, the limbic system. Sorry, this is a typo there. That should be 10. But again, we see that, what we have is that the health of the brain. What are the outcomes? The outcomes is actually the health of the brain in the body. So when we strengthen the parts of the brain, we see that, when we meditate, when we do exercises, when we eat healthily, the health of the brain and the body improves. And this is the hardware for the mind. And we see that, the hardware for the mind makes it stronger, more powerful. There's more greater mental stamina. And when that happens, we see that our intellect becomes more sharper. Our memory becomes much better. And you see, as we age, the memory starts declining. But if we meditate and we do all the things that I said, our memory becomes much more stronger. Memory bank is so important because you draw in that information, right? That information is really important for the memory. And we see that memory, whenever we want to learn, the memory is very important. Memory is like the library system, right? It stores information. If you can't store the information, you see that when you want it, when you're trying to make sense, it's very difficult. So we see that memory we get when the memory is strong, there is clarity of thought. And the best part of the memory is that you sort that information in your memory, and there are pieces of information. And now when you put the pieces together, the intellect is able to connect them and give you a bigger picture, a better picture, deeper picture of what you are trying to understand and analyze, right? And you see something happens in the aging process. When parts of the brain start shutting down, you have memories that are stored start disappearing, or fragments of it start disappearing. And you see that you can't make sense of things. And you forget things and you can't piece it together. Parts of the puzzle is missing. But if your memory bank is very strong, all the short-term memory, it's deepened and it's stored. You see that sometimes, you have all the parts. When you're thinking together, you're able to do the connectivity between the different fragments of information. That gives you clarity of thought. That gives you a kind of a seamless understanding of things. You may have sequence of thoughts. It's able to piece it together to give you a bigger picture, a more complete picture, a more comprehensive picture. And that's why sometimes we say paripurnam, a completeness. You understand things in a more complete way. And that naturally leads us to a more enlightened state of existence, which is essentially you understand things, fragments of information, pieces of information, you can connect it into a more universal, comprehensive understanding. And that's what enlightened state of existence. And you see that there's a lot of literature that shows that people who practice for a very long time will be able to get a more universal outlook than just much more, limited understanding of things. That universal outlook gives you a more comprehensive, understanding of the reality, and you're able to link between, if you see in the previous satsangs, between that universal, formless, dimensionless, to form consciousness and the whole experience of life. Be able to piece that information together. Otherwise, it's just fragments, or the creator is this is the universe, this is. So all different pieces of information that you can't make sense. But when you practice meditation, when the hardware of the brain is all firing up, when it's fully connected, we see that it is able to piece all the information together, and you have that comprehensive, universal understanding, the seamless integration of that knowledge from the creator to the creation to the self, consciousness, and what this material world, the space, and the time, this continuum all becomes seamlessly one because you're able to capture that comprehensively. So this is what enlightened state of existence. And when you have that experience of a more enlightened state of experience, your mind becomes very creative. You have that inner joy in you, the happiness that is not related to anything material. You see? And you see that experience that you get, the blissful experience, that connected state. The connected state is, though you are in the material body, you're connected to that seamless, information base, or the seamless knowledge that is cutting across beyond your own biology. And that's what many of them speak about as the self-realization or God realization, the self-discovery, and the self-actualization of this whole continuum. So it is a gradual process. So it starts off with that spending time with introspecting, contemplating, reflecting, meditating, and also doing a more universal activity of service that is beyond your own material, existence, not just your own selfish way of looking after yourself, but extending that to becoming selfless, first becoming, selfness to discover who you are. You become selfless, and that self-realization takes place. So there's an evolution there as we expand our field of consciousness. And this is what, these great saints and sages have been speaking about. There's a physiological change that has an impact, a psychological change, and ultimately leads to a spiritual experience of one's own self. So this brings us to the end of this part of what happens in the brain as we start practicing meditation. The next time I'm going to cover Mahan's meditational method, the 3 stages of initiation, and the kind of parts of the brain that is actually fired up in each of the stages of that meditation. And you'll see that I'll show you that when you do the first stage, which part of the brain that is fired up. In second stage, which part of the brain that is fired up. And then the third stage, which part of the brain is fired up. And when you are practicing this long enough and all 3 parts are impacted, you see that you have the full impact of that spiritual experience over time. So this is what I will cover the next time, of how our Mahan's meditation method cuts across, impacting the 12 parts of our brains. So physiological change that leads to igniting our happy hormones, giving us the happy feeling, the endurance, ability to overcome, transcend pain and challenges, and ultimately help us to become resilient, and more importantly, help us to experience a much more enlightened state of connectedness with everything. Sandosham.